All right, so we're continuing our study of worship in the Old Testament, and as a subset of that, we're studying the sacrifices in the Old Testament. Last week we started on the first of a few sets. I don't really have them numbered because they overlap one another, and to number them probably wouldn't be accurate anyway, because there's doubtlessly one that I've missed. There's so many. But I've got them categorized in a couple of different ways, or categorized to kind of help organize it a little bit. And we talked about the expiatory offerings. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I think so, but I'm not sure. And all that means is they're offerings that are to appease, to make amends, to bring something to an end. And basically offerings for the atonement of sins. These were, as you might guess, some of them called sin offerings. And we're not going to go through all of it. I'm just doing a quick review. Sin offerings, and they had different ways that they were expressed depending on where you were in the class system, I guess, if you want to call that. For priests, for rulers, etc. So if you were poor, there's a special way that you could handle your offerings there. So there was some variation in how those were given or were offered. And then there were trespass or guilt offerings. We talked a little bit about those. Didn't go into much detail on those, but with both of these, if you want to learn more about them and get into detail, just read the book of Leviticus, specifically chapters 4 through 7, and you'll get those two types of offerings. You can also read chapter 14 as well. So if you want to learn about the offerings and how detailed they are, just dig into Leviticus. I will say that, there are certain parts of the Bible that are exciting and that are full of action. That's not one of them. It's going to be a little bit drier, but there's a lot of blood involved. So I guess if you're into that, you'll enjoy it. But a lot of animal sacrifice, a lot of... There's some interesting things. In fact, there's a couple of chapters, I believe it's 10 and 11, that talk about how the priests were to determine if someone had leprosy or not. And they had to be able to diagnose whether it was leprosy or just a skin condition. And there's a whole process that they had to go through, which is pretty fascinating. And it tells a lot about how the priests had to be able to diagnose these things to determine whether or not it was the big bad leprosy, or it was just a rash, basically. But pretty neat stuff. So Leviticus 9 and 10, if you just want to read that. There's a sermon's worth of material in those two chapters, probably a couple sermons. But today we're going to start by looking at the consecratory offerings, or offerings that were for consecration, to make something holy or sacred. And so these are offerings for dedication. And the first one we're going to look at is burnt offerings. You're probably familiar with hearing about burnt offerings. They represented the commitment that should accompany the repentance expressed by the sin and guilt offering. So they're often given alongside those. And so they could include the offering of a bull or a goat or a bird. So let's look at Leviticus chapter 1, beginning verse 1, and we'll see a little bit about this. This is where they're beginning to be introduced. And the Lord called unto Moses and spake unto him out of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, If any of you bring an offering unto the Lord, ye shall bring your offering of the cattle, even of the herd and of the flock. If this offering be a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own voluntary will at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord. And he shall put his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make an atonement for him. And he shall kill the bullock before the Lord, and the priests. Aaron's sons shall bring the blood and sprinkle the blood round about upon the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. So here's the example of where they would use a bull, but it already mentions there in the first few verses that it could also be of the flock, or a sheep or a goat. If you skip down to verse 10, Leviticus 1:10, you can see that he says, if this offering be of the flocks, namely of the sheep or of the goats or of a burnt sacrifice, he shall bring it a male without blemish. And then he goes on to proceed to explain how that process would work. And then if you skip down to, well, not down, it's a little ways, Leviticus chapter 12, verse 6, you see that there's a commendation made for offering of a bird. Leviticus 12:6. And when the days of her purifying are fulfilled for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring a lamb of the first year for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation unto the priest. So there's an inclusion also of a bird for the offerings associated with that, for the purification. The purification offering is one that I think we kind of covered that. Let me make sure. I think that falls under the category of the trespass or guilt offerings as well. There's the purification of someone who either had a disease or had a condition where they lost a lot of blood. They would have to have a purification offering associated with that, and that would tie in with the giving of the birthing of a child and things like that. I don't know if we went into detail on that last week, so could be a bull, a goat, or a bird. There were continual burnt offerings made twice daily, a male lamb in the morning and evening, and 2 additional lambs each Sabbath. So let's look at Exodus 29. I skipped over a lot of verses last week, and I apologize for that. I shouldn't have done that. We should have just read them. I mean, it's a Bible study after all, so rectifying that this week by reading more of them. I might skip a few just here and there, but we're going to read more of the scriptures. Exodus 29, beginning verse 38. Now this is that which thou shalt offer upon the altar, 2 lambs of the first year, day by day continually. The one lamb thou shalt offer in the morning, and the other lamb thou shalt offer at even. Let's see how far I want to go. 38 through 42. And the one lamb, and with the one lamb, a 10th deal of flour mingled with a 4th part of an hin of beaten oil, and the 4th part of an hin of wine for a drink offering. And the other lamb thou shalt offer at even, and shalt do thereto according to the meat offering of the morning, and according to the drink offering thereof, for a sweet savor, an offering made by fire unto the Lord. And this shall be a continual burnt offering throughout your generations at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, where I meet you, to speak there unto thee. So morning and evening, these burnt offerings were made. An important thing to remember is the priests that was how they ate. They didn't have regular jobs, so to speak. I mean, if you're sacrificing animals all day long, basically, and tending to the people, you wouldn't really have time to do a regular job. So that was how the Lord accommodated for their ability to eat. So some of these offerings included that. So it kind of makes sense that they would have the 2 offerings, morning and evening, that would give the priests, some sustenance. So it's there's a factor in that. On the holy days, things like New Moon and Passover and the Feast of Weeks, the sin offering of 1 goat was required along with the burnt offerings. Additionally, a set of 2 young bulls, 1 ram, and 7 male lambs. Numbers 28, 11, 19, and 27. So again, they had all of these accommodations they had to make. All of these things they had to keep in mind and plan for and be prepared for as they're tending their flocks, counting their sheep, picking out which ones are the best ones in preparation for that. Always keeping in memory the sacrifices they were to give to God, every aspect of their lives. And that's really I really what I'm trying to emphasize here. At the climax of the Festival of Booths, or an annual festival like the Festival of Booths, it was marked by a series of elaborate burnt offerings. Numbers chapter 29, beginning verse 12. So if you want to read that along with me. Numbers 29, 12. This isn't a long reading, but I think it, again, will emphasize the detail into which they had to prepare for, they had to keep in their minds. Beginning verse 12. And on the 15th day of the 7th month ye shall have an holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work, and ye shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. And ye shall offer a burnt offering, a sacrifice made by fire of a sweet savor unto the Lord, 13 young bullocks, 2 rams, and 14 lambs, the first year. They shall be without blemish. And their meat offering shall be of flour mingled with oil, 3/10 deals unto every bullock of the 13 bullocks, 2/10 deals to each ram of the 2 rams, and a several tenth deal unto each lamb of the 14 lambs, and 1 kid of the goats for a sin offering, beside the continual burnt offering, his meat offering, and his drink offering. And he continues to go. We won't read all of it. You have to read all the way to the end of the chapter to see every aspect of this particular sacrifice. But every day they had to do a similar type of sacrifice. But you can see the detail that they had to go into, things they had to remember, things they had to know. And so these sacrifices were continual. And one thing I guess I'll point out, when it says like several tenth deal, that's just a measurement of, like we would measure a cup or whatever. And I started to look up all of these different things, but I figured we'd get bogged down into, in the calculations of how much it actually is. And since we don't have to do it anymore, it probably doesn't matter to us in the grand scheme of things. If you want to look that up, you can. In a later study, I am going to reference a little bit about some of that, but I didn't want to do that. I'll be honest, I just didn't want to do it. Yes, ma'am. Sure. That is a good question. I don't know of any kind of document that they would have kept. I imagine it would be possible. But it would be a full-time job for just one person to have to do that, I would imagine. As it was, they were just kind of taking them and offering them as they go. Yeah, that is a good question. Like, if someone were to bring that offering, how would they remember or know? And I guess, in a way, they didn't really have to. Like, God is the one who's taking care of that. Like, it's kind of like when we come to the Lord to worship today. If I'm sitting in the pew and I'm thinking about, cartoons instead of listening to the sermon, you might not know that. You might not know. I might look like I'm paying attention, but I could be, off in La La Land, thinking of Tom and Jerry or whatever, while the sermon's going on. But God knows what I'm thinking. God knows where my heart is. And so I think that's probably why they wouldn't need to, but they certainly could have. I just don't know of any kind of record that they would have done. But it is a good question, good thought. At the climax of the festival, we looked at that one. Some of the purification rituals called for burnt offerings, as well as sin offerings. I think I alluded to this earlier. Childbirth, abscesses, hemorrhages, and other things that cause ritual defilement. We won't necessarily go into all the detail of that, but you can look at Leviticus chapter 12 and chapter 15 to see what those things were and how those things were dealt with. But basically anything that involved involved blood, which would cause them to be ritually unclean. And so they would have to make atonements, they would have to make sacrifices for that, to be purified in that sense. They'd make those burnt offerings. The burnt offering signified complete surrender to God. If you think about it, when the animal was sacrificed, the blood was spilled and the animal was burnt. It was consumed by the fire. So the idea that it was completely given or wholly given to God, holy as in W-H-O-L-Y, given to God. And so it was associated with that sin offering and in the process of atonement and sacrifice. If you remember Jephthah's rash vow, when he promised to give as a burnt offering the first thing that he saw, the first thing that greeted him when he returned home in the book of Judges, and he saw his daughter, some have concluded that he burnt his daughter as a sacrifice. I don't believe that God would have accepted that, but he did offer her as a burnt offering in the sense that he dedicated her life. And if you read the account of that, and I won't get into it into too much depth, but if you read the account of that, it says that they mourned the women mourned that she would not have any children. Well, if he burnt her alive, of course they would mourn she wouldn't have children, but it's more likely that she offered herself basically as a virgin to God and never had a child. Kind of similar to the Nazirite vow, where there's specifics associated with that. I could be wrong about that, but that's kind of the way I lean toward it. I don't think God ever accepted a human sacrifice. I don't think that's what God would demand of Jephthah. But in the sense that she could not have children, therefore she could not be in the seed line of Christ, it would immediately exclude her from that possibility. And for the Jews of that time, that would have been a very serious thing. In modern times, that concept isn't quite so, isn't considered as bad if someone can't have children. But during that time, it was, if you didn't have children, if you were a woman and you couldn't have children, in those days, you were kind of considered you're not valuable. You were considered less. And you could see that in the scriptures where women who couldn't have children were treated not very well. But anyway, I didn't mean to get in that deviation there. The next one is a cereal or grain offering, also called a meat offering. We talked about this a little bit probably several weeks ago at this point. But cereal or grain offerings, meat offerings, basically these are offerings of things that you could eat. When we talk about meat offerings, all that really referred to is something that it's something that you ate versus something that you drank. So meat versus drink is the contrast there. And these were gift offerings, which in the prescribed text signifies a concoction of fine flour, frankincense, and olive oil, without leaven and without honey. Leviticus chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. So they would have been kind of like the unleavened bread that we have, except exactly like it because they didn't have leaven. Leviticus is before Deuteronomy. My fingers don't want to turn the pages this morning. All right, Leviticus 2, verses 1 through 3. And when any will offer a meat offering unto the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil upon it, and put frankincense thereon. And he shall bring it unto Aaron's sons, the priests, and he shall take thereout his handful of the flour thereof, and of the oil thereof, and with all the frankincense thereof. And the priest shall burn the memorial of it upon the altar, to be an offering made by fire, of a sweet savor unto the Lord. And the remnant of the meat offering shall be Aaron's and his sons. This is a thing most holy of the offerings of the Lord made by fire. So here's an example of where Aaron and his sons would use this for their ability for sustenance. It often came in the form of loaves, wafers, or morsels. A morsel is just a small amount of food, or a small piece of a loaf. You might say that the little bite-sized pieces of bread that we have on the communion would be called morsels. It'd be something like that. So as it's mentioned there, a handful was burned on the altar, and the rest was the priest to eat, except when he offered for himself. And then the whole was burnt on the the altar. And it normally accompanied the burnt offerings, so it went along with those. And you can look at, Leviticus chapter 2 really is the chapter that covers that, but you can also look at chapter 6 to see some more about these cereal or grain offerings. Basically, again, they're just offerings of things that were edible, things you could eat. Specifically things that you could eat. Of course, you could eat a lamb or a bullock, but this is kind of specific to something one would have with a meal. And then associated with that, we have the drink offerings. These are normally accompanied a burnt offering as well as a peace offering, and they represented, again, just giving to God, offering oneself to God. Let's look at Leviticus chapter 23. Verse 13. I jumped all the way to Numbers. (23:13). And the meat offering thereof shall be 2/10 deals of fine flour mingled with oil, an offering made by fire unto the Lord for a sweet savor. And the drink offering thereof shall be of wine, the 4th part of an hin. And so they would offer wine. Now, something we've studied, I think, on a couple Wednesdays ago, the word wine in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament does not necessarily mean alcoholic wine. In fact, more often than I would argue that if you read the word wine in the Bible, I would say most of the time it's not referring to alcoholic wine. It's probably just referring to grape juice. Because in the old days, in the Old Testament times, even in the New Testament times, they did not have a word for alcoholic wine and non-alcoholic wine. It was just a product of the grape. Even the word wine was used to describe the fruit still on the vine, actual grapes. And so when you read the word wine, I would encourage you to try to train your mind to think grape juice first until the context makes you conclude something else. More than likely, it's just referring to grape juice. To them, fresh grape juice was better than anything else. It was the best drink. It kind of is the best drink. I love grape juice. But fresh grape juice was the thing that was the most valuable, because if you think about it, fresh grape juice doesn't stay fresh very long. And as grape juice starts to spoil, it doesn't become alcoholic, it becomes vinegar, bitter. There are some things that can naturally ferment on the vine. And if you've ever tasted that, I used to eat muscadines off the vine, and when they started to ferment, squirrels would eat them, and the squirrels would get kind of tipsy. It's kind of funny to watch. But if you were to eat them, they don't taste good. They don't taste like, to me, I've tasted wine before, and it doesn't taste good to me either. But it's not pleasant. So to them, fresh grape juice was the best thing, because it is the best thing. It tastes a lot better than grape juice that's spoiled or what have you. I could go further on this rant, but I won't. I have whole sermons and Bible classes we could dig into about it. But just keep that in mind. When you read wine, especially when it comes to these sacrifices, it's probably fresh grape juice. It's probably as fresh as they can get it. And also, I have to say this, since I'm on it, they knew how to preserve grape juice. They would either boil it down to make it to where it was basically Kool-Aid. They would boil it down until it was a syrup, and the syrup wouldn't spoil, and they could rehydrate it to make kind of like we would do, if you've ever bought those frozen concentrate juice cylinders, similar to that, except theirs was dry, and they would just pour water in it and make it, and it's not as good as the fresh, but it's grape juice. They knew how to do that kind of thing. They had ways of preserving things. So the whole concept that people often say it's a false idea that they had to drink alcohol because that's all they had. No, that's not historically accurate. Okay, there's my soapbox. I'm stepping off of it for now. It's right there if I need it though. So the drink offering, probably just grape juice. Moving on to the next one, there are what we call communal offerings, offerings that the people collectively would bring. One thing about these is that they are voluntary offerings. I guess in a sense, all of them are voluntary, like you could choose not to do it. But these were not things that were prescribed by schedule or prescribed by certain circumstances. You would just choose to do it whenever you felt like it, whenever you felt the need to it or the desire to do it. And there's connections that we'll talk about with these. But let's look at Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus 19, verse 5. I'm going to start in verse 1, if you don't mind. Thank you. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, and say unto them, Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Ye shall fear every man his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Turn ye not unto idols, nor make unto yourselves molten gods. I am the Lord your God. And if ye offer a sacrifice of peace offerings unto the Lord, ye shall offer it at your own will. So here's the idea that it's a voluntary thing, at your own will, at your choosing. I'm going to go ahead and read verse 6 as well. And it says, And if it shall be eaten the same day ye offer it, and on the morrow, if aught remain unto the third day, it shall be burnt in the fire. And so there's connections with how this offering was made. So there were these peace offerings. They were voluntary. And though the specific animal regulations were different regarding these, the sacrifice still had to be without blemish. That's universal with all of these. It probably doesn't need to be said, but I am going to repeat it because it is something that God repeats to them, emphasizes to them. The animal was slaughtered at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, Leviticus chapter 3, verses 2 and 8. And the culmination of every peace offering was the communal meal that included the one making the offering, his family, and the Levite in his community. Kind of think of it as you make a peace offering, and it's kind of like a fellowship meal with the Levite or with the priest who is taking care of it. Kind of like having the preacher over for dinner sort of thing. I don't mean to demean it or make it a common meal, but it was something that involved not just the individual and the priest, but it involved the priest and the whole family of that individual. In a way, it was kind of doing that. It was kind of showing, and it might be, you might have it, let's say, the idea it's a peace offering. You might have the offering, and you might have the person that you had conflict with, and you basically come together under that fellowship, and the priest is there, perhaps even to mediate. I might be putting too much into that, but that seems like what the idea behind it is that you're trying to show the fellowship with someone. There's a fellowship connected with this, it seems like. It would be the Levite and his community at the divinely appointed sanctuary, and very strict rules of purity were observed by the participants. So everybody had to be on board with it. It had to be voluntary for everyone. So that kind of makes sense. If you were having a fight with your brother or brother-in-law, and you're trying to make make things good, if you all agreed to make it right, you could have this peace offering to be kind of like, to stand before God to show that you're making this restitution between each other. Let's look at Leviticus chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, just to get kind of a sense of that. I'm trying not to read too much into these things, just because the way my brain works, but there's some things that seem like that would make sense. Leviticus 7, 13 and 14. It says, "Besides the cakes, he shall offer for his offering leavened bread with the sacrifice of thanksgiving for his peace offering, and it shall be and he shall offer one out of the whole oblation," that's a drink offering, "for a heave offering unto the Lord, and it shall be the priest that sprinkleth the blood of the peace offering." And so there's a lot that goes on into it, and you could read really all of chapter 7, or at least chapter 7, beginning around verse 11, for that. At the local level, they were offerings for family gatherings and other festive events, so it kind of was a way, again, it seemed like a way for families to get together and fellowship, and at the same time include their honoring God for that. It wasn't necessarily a common meal. It was a very special thing. And I would relate it similar to our fellowship meals, like when we have fellowship meals with the congregations do. It is a special thing. It isn't the same thing as this. They're not regulated as much. But the idea is that it is for the purpose of God's people getting together, families joining together, and honoring God, which is similar to what our fellowship meals are. They're not really like an everyday meal. They're something special. At least I like to think of them as that. Not regulated by the Scriptures necessarily, but special nonetheless. As we read there in Leviticus 7, there was the mention of a heave offering. That's the next one we're going to look at, heave offerings or wave offerings. Not wave like that, but wave like they would wave the offering before the Lord, like presenting it to him in a way. The priest portion of the offering was waved before the Lord as a special act of signifying that it was his. This belongs to you, but I'm grateful that I'm about to partake of it. So it's a similar way of blessing the meal that he's about to eat that he wouldn't have except the Lord had provided it for him through the means of that offering. Let's look at Numbers chapter 18, verse 11. I did this gesture. I don't know if that's how they did it. I'm sure they were respectful in how they did it. They weren't, flapping the bread in the air or anything like that. I'm sure it's some kind of solemn means of presenting to God. But it's kind of like the postures of prayer. Different postures of prayer represent different attitudes of toward God. 18, sorry, I just went to 13. 18, verse 11. "And this is thine, the heave offering of their gift, with all the wave offerings of the children of Israel. I have given them unto thee, and to thy sons and to thy daughters with thee, by statute forever. Every one that is clean in thy house shall eat of it." So this is the idea of the priests partaking of the heave offerings. I probably should point out, and you've probably noticed this as we've read these things, a lot of these are overlapping. Some of the offerings that are peace offerings also incorporate within them the heave offering, or they might incorporate within them some other offering because they do overlap. They might have multiple purposes, or they might have different layers of what's being involved in these offerings. And so that's kind of an important factor to all of these, that while they do have different individual things that are happening, some of them are kind of wrapped up together. But there's a mentality that was connected to them. At least that's how I understand it. I may not be clear on it. There were offerings that were called thank offerings, or offerings of gratitude, offerings of thankfulness, thanksgiving. Let's look at 2 Chronicles 29:31. 2 Chronicles 29:31. Then Hezekiah answered and said, Now ye have consecrated yourselves unto the Lord. Come near and bring sacrifices and thank offerings unto the house of the Lord. And the congregation brought in sacrifices and thank offerings, and as many as were of a free heart, burnt offerings. And so, again, this is another sacrifice, another offering that was one that was voluntary. But it was, again, showing their gratitude toward God. Thanking God for the blessings that he had bestowed, for his protection or what have you. It could be any number of things, but as an offering of gratitude. Oh, yes, sir.
All this stuff that you're covering now, all these different sacrifices, these things went on every day, 7 days a week.
Absolutely.
The Sabbath. And with a congregation of 2 million people, Aaron and his sons and the Levites helping out, they had to be wide open from morning to night, doing nothing but this stuff all day long, with a line waiting outside to bring their sacrifices. So
exactly. I think that's a very important point. Thank you for pointing that out.
30 years old and 50 years old, they were retired, so they were wide open.
Yes, they were serving every single day. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that does tie into, and I'm going to get into this more later, but the fact that Christians are priests. Now, think about, under the Old Testament, priests serve God every single day. And we talk about how it's a lot easier now to be a Christian than it would have been to be a Jew under the Old Testament. And that is true in some sense. Your average Jew. But if you're a priest, it was that much more difficult. But if Christians are priests today, serving in God's kingdom, in God's temple, which is the church, which is all of us, there's kind of a double metaphor there. We're both the priests and the temple. The church is the temple, and we're the priests of that temple. I think the principle that we learn from this is that as priests, we are to serve God every day. We are to be thankful to God every day. We are to seek to make peace with those that we have conflict with every day. Every time we eat a meal or drink a drink, we need to be conscious of the blessing that it is and offer it to God. We talk about praying for our meals and stuff like that, and that's good, but we should not be praying just 2 or 3 times a day when we have a meal. As Christians, as priests in God's kingdom, we are to be offering to God all the time. That's why Paul calls Christians to be living sacrifices, Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, because we're continually offering ourselves to God every day. Does that mean that we don't have time for other things? No, but everything should be approached with the attitude that I am a servant of God first. And everything else we do because we are servants of God. The reason I do my job or go to my regular 9 to 5 or whatever job, and the reason I work hard and I work diligently at that job, even if I don't like it or I don't like my boss, is because I'm God's my boss first. God is my king first. And so I think that carries that idea that while we don't make these literal offerings of bread and so forth every single day, we are constantly making offerings to God of ourselves, of our thoughts and our time. So that I think that is a very good point. We have just a few more to cover, and then I have some summaries to go over that shouldn't take too long. So we have votive offerings. A votive offering isn't going to the polls. It is of offering when you take a vow before God. It is connected to burnt offerings, Leviticus 22:18 through 23. Oops, I skipped one. That's not right. Leviticus 7, verses 16 and 17. Sacrifices, it was offered when you made a vow or a promise. And when you did this before the Lord. So God was involved in making those vows. It was connected with burnt offerings and peace offerings. But as we know, Christians today, we are forbidden from making vows. I would say there are two exceptions. When we become a Christian, there's a sense in which we make a vow to God. We're committing ourselves to God. And the other one that I would consider perhaps an exception is when a man and a woman are married. They're making a vow before God. I think that's something I try to stress whenever I haven't done a whole lot of weddings, but whenever I do a wedding, I point out that the two people are making a vow in the presence of God. They're making a vow to God. And so it's to each other, but also God's involved. And so those might be the two exceptions that Christians have for making vows. But we're not to make vows. We don't need to anymore. That's not to say we can't make arrangements or deals or whatever like that, but I think there is a distinction there. But votive offerings, making vows. There are other free will offerings that are given. Again, we'll just kind of go through these pretty quickly. They're also associated with burnt offerings. Free will offerings are part of the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 10. They're also called voluntary offerings as well, Leviticus 7. And again, it's possible that these communal offerings or these offerings kind of tie back into several other of the offerings. So there could be overlap. I could be making two offerings out of one that's the same. I'm just basing it off of the way that the Bible terms them. And then there are ordination offerings. These are offerings given to consecrate someone to a divine service. So perhaps a king, perhaps someone becomes a ruler in a city. They would make an offering of ordination, dedicating themselves first to God and their service to God. So very quickly, just a few summary items on this in the short time we have left. First, they maintained the place of the people in God's nation. It had the people focusing every day, constantly on God. That's a lesson that we could learn from that and benefit from that. We should always be focused on God and how God would have us to conduct ourselves. Second, these offerings showed that God's justice must be satisfied. When someone sinned, that sin there had to be an atonement made for it. Constantly reminded that sin was there, ever present in their lives, and eventually, of course, with the coming of Christ, the sin was wiped away. A constant reminder of the sin that was their burden. Number three, a constant reminder of how horrible sin was. The fact that it just doesn't go away, and they had to keep making atonement for it. It pointed to a perfect sacrifice that was to come. It taught that man alone could not purify himself, that we can't do that on our own. They had to continually approach God. And then, like 3 more points. And then it taught the principle that the innocent had to suffer for the guilty, again pointing to Christ. And then it emphasized the necessity of keeping God's law, doing it God's way. We'll finish this next week. I don't want to get too riled up. Just a couple things we'll cover next week as we wrap it up. Thank you all for your attention and your time.